Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I'm Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do Ripped from the Headlines.
And I do pop culture.
It's almost like magic, Jessica. You were gone and you're back. Like poof.
It's my triumphant return.
And it's really because we recorded those episodes before you left, which was very smart of us, but we probably should have said that on the podcast because everybody I've been talking to is like, how long is Jess going to be gone for? And I'm like, well, she's back.
Well,
fear not, she joins us again.
Pulled a fast one. No, I mean, I think that there have been several times when you and I have been very crafty and put a whole bunch of episodes in the bank, and
it's always weird with time, but
yeah, well, I feel very smug about it, which I shouldn't, because you're the one who makes all of that happen and schedule it. I'm admitting that fully, but I feel very smug about it because I feel like we're very organized and more organized in our podcasting than some other people might be. So look at us. Never skipping a week.
And while you were gone, which was really exciting, I guess that's a word, on 1980s Now, that podcast, which is really so fun. So I finally got to meet Will and meet Kat. I was subbing for John, and I had a blast. It was so fun, and I hope they have me back.
What do you think you learned by being on someone else's podcast for the first time, as opposed to sitting here in my office staring at my mug for 3 years or however long we've been doing this?
Well, everyone has a different way of approaching things, and I definitely think I can ask, because we're going to start our YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm. Hey,
this is a bit of an announcement.
YouTube.
And they already have a YouTube channel, and we did it live. We were doing a live thing, and I was like, I'm usually kind of scared of that. You don't have to be scared of that. Doing live stuff is fun. And who knows what you're going to say.
Well, are you going to have a beep button for me?
I don't think we have to have a beep button.
Oh, thank God. Okay. No, I don't think we have to at all. I was just thinking that, there have been many times when I'm saying something and you look at me over the mic and you're like, shut up.
Well, maybe that'll make it more exciting.
The tension.
All right. And we have to get to our stories because we have a lot to do today. But I also wanted to share, so much has happened since you've been gone. Alex Smith reached out.
Oh, yes. I know about it.
Oh my God, did he think I was saying something that I wasn't saying?
Wait. Maybe there's something. Read it.
Let me read what he wrote. And I hate to be a little defensive. I think I got a little defensive because I was like, that's not what I was trying to say, Alex. But anyway, he said, okay, for a start, if you're messed up on acid and angel dust, the music you're listening to has precious fuck all to do with your actions. You're as likely to be motivated to kill someone via a Partridge Family record as you would be by an Ozzy one, which I think I said on the podcast. And then he said, yes, I was a city kid like yourselves, but was just as enamored with the oeuvre of Black Sabbath, Judas Priest, and Iron Maiden as I was by Blondie, Devo, and
Talking
Talking Heads.
Could that be more, Alex, to be like, first off, oeuvre.
No, heavy metal is not for everyone, but it is not so easily summed up and dismissed, nor was it solely for stoner suburbanites. I didn't mean to dismiss it. I really didn't.
Well,
I was a vehement fan of arguably very silly bands like Venom, Accept, and Celtic Frost, and I never killed anyone, or haven't yet. At least, in terms of metal bands from the 70s and 80s, for most of the bigger names who flirted with satanic imagery, Sabbath, Slayer, Merciful Fate, Venom, etc., it was strictly artifice, showbiz, which you said. I remember you saying that.
Indeed, I did.
In the 90s, however, inspired largely by Venom, there was a whole generation of bands, black metal from Norway and Scandinavia, like Mayhem, Bathory, Dark Throne, Burzum, and loads more who were deadly serious about it, resulting in a rash of church burnings and, wait for it, murder. Most notoriously, when Varg Vikernes of Mayhem, who murdered his lead singer, Euronymous. Gosh. For more on that, there's a great book called Lords of Chaos and a documentary called Until the Light Takes Us that are really compelling. Anyway, and then he goes on to talk about River's Edge. But I mean, not to make it about me.
No, I'm gonna put this to bed right now.
Okay.
in no way, shape, or form do I believe that you or I ever said that metal causes people to kill other
I
people.
feel like
That's
I said the opposite.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely not the case. I'm hoping that Alex's comment is sort of to like about the public out there who thought that it's
Okay.
not to you.
Maybe I was just being very
But what
sensitive.
I do know is that, and I will take the hit on this one, is that I was like suburban metal dum-dums. That
I
might
mean,
very well have been me, because there was not a single person who I encountered who was into metal in our world in the city.
I set you up because I said, what did you think about heavy metal when you were a teenager? And both of us were not huge fans of it, but since then have grown to appreciate it thanks to people like Alex Smith.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb. I don't appreciate. I mean, but you know what I do
More
appreciate?
so.
Here's what I appreciate about it. This is for real. And this is really what he's saying. In the same way that I really appreciate the theatrics of Alice Cooper,
Right.
the theatrics that were one step away from glam rock,
Yes.
of metal. And, you know, I don't even know if we could even, I mean, is it in hindsight, do we say that Motley Crue was, what were they? Were they glam? I don't
Obviously,
even know.
I should not have an opinion on this because everything I said was
But
wrong.
all of that, looking back on it as showbiz, A+.
Right.
Was the music something that I cared about? Absolutely not. And still don't, except for, I mean, it was Judas Priest metal?
I think so.
Right. So, I mean, and of course, in hindsight, I mean, don't forget that musical tastes and pushing the envelope changes, so that what sounded really heavy then now sounds like nursery rhymes.
Also, and I did say this, sorry to keep being defensive, that there's a wide spectrum of what is considered heavy metal, is my understanding, and that we were talking about one tiny little sliver that absolutely had nothing to do with the murders. Just to clarify, in case it wasn't clear, I just want to make sure I say that. And also, then he wrote back again to talk about how AC/DC was, in fact, not heavy metal. I did not say AC/DC was heavy metal. It's just that Ricky Queso was wearing an AC/DC t-shirt when he was arrested. That's all. And in conclusion, absolutely in conclusion, we can wrap this up. I do not have opinions. I'm just reporting what other people's experiences were. I have opinions about some things. I do not have opinions about heavy metal. I will say that. And Alex Smith does, and he should, because he knows from, and I do not. So I just need to make that very clear.
When we talk about new wave, then you and I can really get
And also, the episode that we and Alex were referencing is Lost Boys and Grizzly Griselda that dropped a couple weeks ago. We have to get started because we have so much to talk about today. You ready?
Yes.
Jessica, have you ever been to Madison Square Garden?
Yes.
For an event?
Yes.
What event?
Sports games.
Oh, sports?
Hockey.
What? Oh, hockey?
And
God,
there's so many things you don't know about me.
And also so many things I don't know about Madison Square Garden.
And I would say most recently, I was there for one of the Billy Joel concerts with our friend Sophie.
Amazing. All righty. My sources are the New York Times, To the Moon and Back, A Childhood Under Influence by Lisa Cohn, How to Become a Cult Leader, which is a Netflix docuseries. I think that's what you call it. And it's so fun. It is so amusing.
Oh, good.
And a bunch of articles by Stephen Hassan. On July 1st, 1982, 18-year-old Lisa Cohn sat in the stands at Madison Square Garden trying to find her mother in the sea of 2,000 couples, the women all in white wedding dresses and the men all in blue suits. They were there to be married in a mass ceremony presided over by Sun Myung Moon, the leader of the Unification Church. Lisa had not been born into the Moonies. Her mother, a divorced hippie, had joined the church when Lisa was 10. That's also when her mother left her 2 children with their depressed grandfather in New Jersey and moved into the church headquarters in New York. There, she took care of other members' kids, while Lisa and her brother struggled with being abandoned by their parents. In spite of her pain and confusion, or maybe because of it, Lisa also became an ardent member of the Unification Church. Her mother was AWOL, her grandfather was too depressed to function, and her father was erratic and always on drugs, so the rigid structure of the church was a relief.
Even though that's where her mother was.
Yeah, like you mean that she didn't blame the church for her mother abandoning her?
Right.
No, she didn't.
Fascinating.
More about the Unification Church. Sun Myung Moon was born in Korea, and at 15, Jesus visited him and told him that he was the new Messiah, and he had a lot of work to do. Jesus had messed up by not getting married, and Sun Myung Moon needed to fix everything. Then he revealed the divine principle, Jesus did, to Sun Myung Moon. You see, it turns out this is what the divine principle says. It's kind of like the 10 Commandments, right?
I am riveted.
It turns out that Eve had sex with Satan and spread sin to Adam, kind of like a venereal disease.
It's like the herpes of
exactly
of snakes and Eden.
Now everyone was born with sin, okay? Except Sun Myung Moon, who could cure women of sin by
his magic penis?
By having sex with them.
Oh, isn't that amazing?
Did you guess?
Oh, my God.
And then they would cure other men through, you guessed it, sex.
So his magic penis created a world of magic vaginas that then cured other disease. Hold on.
Well, sin-filled
satanic,
men.
Satanic penises, which would then, as cured, cure other ladies.
Yeah.
So this is like, remember that ad? And they told 2 friends,
right.
And they told 2 friends, and so on.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
But don't think members of the church should go around having sex with people.
Members?
No. You see, rank and file congregants had to abstain from sex until they were married. And Sun Myung Moon chose the couples in matching ceremonies. He would look out over hundreds of men and women and point to the ones he decided would marry each other. And most of the time, the couples had never met before. He often preferred if the couples were different races and didn't speak the same language.
Well, that's really easy to control people when there's no communication.
Lisa's mother was divorced, so she was less desirable in one of these matching ceremonies. So Sun Myung Moon asked for a volunteer at her matching ceremony. He had her stand up and he said, "Does anyone volunteer to marry her?" And some guy volunteered.
To take this tainted woman.
Yes. Once matched, the couples couldn't have sex before the mass wedding or for 40 days after. And when they did, there were specific ritual positions they had to do. Sex was highly controlled. And we know family units are highly controlled. And sleep is highly controlled as well. There are lots and lots of rules in the Unification Church. Lots. Including how much money you give the church, which many Moonies raised by selling candles and trinkets on the street and in airports. Did you ever come across a Moonie?
No. Maybe. I mean, I remember in the airports that type of I just always thought they were Hare Krishnas.
Well, actually, they are very different because Moonies tend to not tell you they're Moonies. They don't, Hare Krishnas are all dressed very distinctively.
Saffron robes.
Yeah. And Moonies look like you or me, and often they don't tell you they're part of the Unification Church because how they want to indoctrinate you is not to tell you that
they don't want to cult it up.
Right. They want to be, actually, let me continue with my story and you'll find out how they indoctrinate because it is a process. So, what is the upside to being a Moonie?
Do tell.
Why would anyone join? Stephen Hassan, a Jewish boy from Queens who joined up as a 19-year-old college kid, tells of how 3 beautiful young women approached him in a cafeteria. They invited him upstate for the weekend. Sun Myung Moon moved to the United States in 1972 and set up shop in Irvington, New York.
No way.
Did you know that Moonies are like New Yorkers? Did you know that? Now you do.
I'm so unhappy right now.
And he bought the New Yorker Hotel on 34th and 8th Avenue. That was their headquarters.
Stop it.
No.
I had no idea.
Completely. Totally. That is Moonie Central.
And by the way, for those of you who have never seen the New Yorker Hotel, it's extremely distinctive because it's really incredible part of the skyline. It has in giant, tall, red neon letters, New Yorker at the top of the hotel.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I thought it was
the magazine.
The magazine. And it's not. It's the Moonies.
It's the Moonies.
Okay. His 35-room mansion and estate in Irvington was a great place to bring potential members.
I actually know this mansion.
Okay, I bet you do. I mean,
do you know
how do you miss it? If you go to Irvington, it's...
Because that's where our dear friend Sasha lived, in Irvington. Yeah.
What do you mean lived? Like her mother's? Oh, no.
She lives now. It's
like where she lives.
As an adult.
I'm picturing her as like a 16-year-old.
No.
Like, she didn't commute to school. She lived in Soho.
No. As an adult, that is where she moved.
Okay.
And while, going around Irvington with her, she was, she didn't say this is the Moonies. There's this gigantic estate. Yeah. Now I know.
Yeah.
Kooky.
So Stephen had zero interest in religion. Zero. And if someone had mentioned the Messiah, he would have run in the other direction. But the girls talked about what crazy times they were living in. This is so crazy. The world is so crazy right now. It's so unpredictable. And they wanted to make the world a better place. And that did speak to Stephen. He was like, yeah, I want to make the world a better place too.
With 3 hot chicks, because I'm 19.
Who are really paying a lot of attention to me. They were also, he says, they were so very happy. They were extraordinarily happy, beautiful young women. Stephen's dad, a hardware salesman, had told him to be wary of people with shifty eyes, that those were the kinds of people you couldn't trust. But these girls' eyes were laser focused on him. In fact, here's a fun fact. The term love bombing originated with the Moonies.
Get out of town.
Swear to God.
Like a term that they used amongst themselves?
People used describing what the Moonies did, what their approach was, how they got people to join.
So
it was called love bombing.
So this is a term of the 80s?
Yes, late 70s.
I am just flabbergasted.
They praised and flattered and treated potential members with kindness and care. And they were instructed, like I was saying earlier, not to mention the church until well into the indoctrination. Stephen accepted the invitation upstate, and before he knew it, he was living in a commune and sleeping 4 hours a night. His life had felt chaotic when he was in college, but now he had all the answers, and that just felt so much better. It felt safer. According to his host, Sun Myung Moon, quote, if there is illness in your home, do you not need a doctor from outside? God has sent me to America in the role of a doctor, in the role of a firefighter. With my entire heart and soul, I have been teaching American youth a new revelation from God. It made sense. Stephen was fasting and praying, and he handed over his bank account. His family didn't get it, so he stopped talking to them. They just don't understand me.
Oh my
right?
God.
He dropped out of college, which had already been feeling like, am I doing the right thing with my life? Because life is like that.
Yeah, because chaos is life. And when you're 19, you don't know the answers.
Right. And so he was like, oh, the answer is drop out of college. And his new job was as a missionary, recruiting new members and selling carnations on the street to raise money for the Unification Church. One night, after working 2 days without any sleep, he fell asleep at the wheel and was in a horrible car accident. While he was recuperating, his parents hired a deprogrammer to kidnap him. And after 5 days, Stephen suddenly realized he'd been brainwashed. Deprogramming became quite a business in the 70s and 80s. From 1973 to 1986, at least 400 Moonies were abducted by their family members and forced to undergo deprogramming, which wasn't pretty. Subjects were tied to chairs and isolated and browbeaten until they came around. But many, many others stayed in the church.
Can I just quickly interrupt?
Sure.
If you want a really, it's funny, but it's a perfect slice of what you're talking about. There was a Saturday Night Live skit at the time. Dan Aykroyd was deprogramming someone.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So do a
It was a
YouTube
thing.
search.
At its peak in the 1980s, the Unification Church claimed to have 3 million members throughout the world, mostly in Japan and the United States. And once the members married, their children were born into the church, and this second generation were automatic followers. So that was really why he did these mass ceremonies. It was so he could have more members, that he wouldn't even have to indoctrinate because they were born into it. They were kept in the fold through their parents and these summer camps. Children born of Moonie parents. Now, this is interesting. So this is what they call the second generation. Those children were born without sin. So that's really cool, right? So
of course you want to have a baby that's born without sin. Get right on that.
Yes. But this is the problem. You could easily pick up some sin. So you're born without sin.
So we're back to the herpes analogy.
Well, not quite. Well, kind of. So you're born without sin, which is great, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you could pick up sin if you drank or had sex. For example, those are a couple ways you could get sin. You could get sin a bunch of different ways. So it kept these small children just on eggshells. Like they were just on edge all the time because they were so scared they were going to fuck everything up and get some sin. Which, by the way, doesn't sound that different from other religions, But anyway.
Yeah, I do know.
The only way to stay sinless was to stay in the church. So there was the threat. And that's an incentive to stay, right?
Mm-hmm.
People say that if you want, I don't know if you've heard this before. I have heard this, that if you want a hard worker, hire an ex-cult member. Have you ever heard that?
No.
Because those people know how to sacrifice for a greater good and work long hours for little or no pay. And that was the business model of the church. It was ultimately an obligation and a privilege to give your money to Sun Myung Moon, who, unsurprisingly, lived an insanely lavish lifestyle at this estate that you were talking about, as did his wife and his children, who were also considered divine. Remember, he's the Messiah.
Right.
And all money raised for the Unification Church is not taxable because it's a religion. Sun Myung Moon had the support of a number of conservative leaders in the U.S. for a number of reasons, including his outspoken hatred of communism and his deep pockets and widespread influence. He's been praised by Nixon and Bush, and Reagan read the conservative newspaper that Sun Myung Moon published, the Washington Times. Guys, the Washington Times is published by the Moonies.
I've never even heard of the Washington Times.
People read it and they don't realize that they're reading something that is in fact published by a cult. Yes. Donations weren't Sun Myung Moon's only source of income.
Oh, no, it's also carnations from the airport.
He also began for-profit companies. He cornered the market on ginseng tea. If you drink ginseng tea, yep.
No.
Yep. Air rifles.
What?
And, okay, this is going to be a disappointment, and I'm still sort of processing it.
Okay.
Sushi. But I'm going to tell you more about the sushi. Actually, that next week is my sushi story, and I will tell you everything about sushi and the Moonies.
Holy shit.
Yes. Your head will blow off your body when I tell you all this stuff. It is cray-cray. Honestly, I have not stopped eating sushi because of what I know. But
you're like, there is a limit.
Like, don't ruin sushi. And I'm not going to ruin sushi for you, but just so you know, the Moonies own sushi. Okay. And then in 2012, he died.
Mm-hmm.
He had preached that as the Messiah, his family was ideal and sinless, remember?
Mm-hmm.
But he neglected to name a successor for his church, and all hell broke out when he died. When the smoke cleared, his wife, Hak Jahan, who's also called the True Mother, was in charge. But his third son, Hyung Jin Sean Moon, isn't happy about that. And he founded a new church in Pennsylvania called the Rod of Iron Ministries.
Are you shitting me right now?
Wait, just buckle your seatbelt.
The Rod of Iron.
No, listen.
I can't.
He interprets the Rod of Iron, which is actually from Psalm 2:9. Thou shalt break the heathen with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. He interprets that mention in the Bible as an AR-15.
I can't.
His followers bring their guns to church to be blessed, and he wears a golden crown made of rifle shells.
Are you, what?
I'm going to show you a picture. It is so insane. He says he will be the king of America. He hangs out with Don Jr., and he hates his mother, who he calls the Whore of Babylon.
Okay, why are we not scripting something for Netflix right now? Like, I even regret mentioning it because, like, what if someone beats us to it? This is the most hilarious, like, Will Ferrell comedy. I'm the king of America with a crown made of bullet casings, bullet shells, and
in Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania, and I hate my mommy.
Yeah.
Help.
So
what is wrong with
this is a part one.
Okay.
This is your part one. Part two
is sushi.
Is going to be all about the sushi. I don't know. After I wrote this story, I wasn't sure if I really got across how awful it was to be in this cult, because actually some people are really happy. Some people are really, really happy in this cult, but the people who are not, it's like torture. And I'm not sure if that came across.
Well, what I can share with you is that I had a friend for several years who escaped Scientology.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And she was born into it. And she was part of Sea Org.
Oh, my God. That's torture.
And
it's slave labor.
It is slave labor. And she told me a lot about what it was like and the constant monitoring and, you know, being so restricted that you don't have a life, but you do have a life because you have this purpose, you know, because you have to do all of this for the church.
To save the world.
Right. So there is a sense of a mission. But what's interesting to me, you were talking about, you know, the end goal was to have all of these people born into it, that she, as someone born into it, was never a true believer, right? So it's like it was what she knew, but it wasn't something that was sustainable once she became an adult and her critical thinking skills kicked in. So, and she told me about what she had to do to leave the church, you know, being monitored after she left. So I have an awareness of what that's
Yeah.
all about and how awful. And the other thing that I will say to you, I think I've talked about it on this podcast before, that I unintentionally worked for the Hare Krishna.
Right. Yes, you have.
Right. And I did experience the headspace of cult leaders, the guys who own this company.
Mhm.
There were 3 of them who headed the company, and they created factions within the company to fight with each other and have different allegiances. And if you really cared about the company, you would never ask for a raise. You would never. So they were employing these techniques that you're talking about. So again, like, it's not exactly the same, but it's,
No,
I
there's
have
similarities
a
for
really
sure, yeah.
strong inkling, I'd say.
And then the other thing I wanted to say was another quote from Lisa, who did end up escaping the cult. And you know how she did it? She went to college. And when she was in college, she was like, wait a second. They don't like kids to go to college in this cult because they lose a lot of them when they are actually like in an educational institution. But one thing that she said was, quote, "There's nothing as intoxicating as knowing you have the truth." I thought that was
That
like,
is an amazing quote.
right? I mean, I don't hate that idea. That sounds great. Someone's going to give me all the answers and I don't ever have to fret over a decision. Awesome sauce. Now, I would like to sleep in sometimes, and apparently I'm not allowed to do that.
Well, sleep deprivation really, facilitates the control a little bit. I don't know.
But the truth part of it, awesome.
Well, I mean, there's a reason people like to be know-it-alls. You know what I mean, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's comforting to be a know-it-all.
Right. Oh, to think that, yeah.
To think you know everything. Like,
to not be confused.
Yeah.
I know what I know.
Yeah. It's,
and I will not be swayed because I know.
And in that brief sentence, you have described the entire political landscape that we are soaking in right now. Fabulous. Meg.
Yes.
Do you have an album, a record album that you return to as something that you like to sing along with loudly in your apartment when you want to really kick out the jams or pick up your mood? Anything like that?
No, not really.
Well,
sorry.
That's unfortunate for you.
That's a very specific question. I feel like you do, though.
I do. And there are 2, and there's nothing cool about what I'm about to say, but there are 2 that really do it for me. One has been doing it for me since I was a little girl, which is Really Rosie.
Oh, fun.
The other one, just because it's nuts, is the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Ah, yeah, that's fun.
I was watching something on YouTube and a clip came up from the movie where Susan Sarandon is singing Touch It, Touch It, Touch It, Touch Me. And I was laughing because I always like the part of the song where Magenta and Columbia are mocking her and they're going, touch it, touch it, touch it, touch me. And Columbia is so funny. Now, Columbia, for those of you who might know her by sight, but not the name of the character, is the one with the little short red bob, the little Louise Brooks bob, who in that scene is wearing a Mickey Mouse hat. Well, that woman who played Columbia, Nell Campbell, is someone who changed the face of New York nightlife. So she is actually Australian, from a very bohemian family. Her mother was an artist. Her sister is a really well-known artist. Her dad was a writer and a humorist. And her name is not Nell, but her dad called her Little Nell after the book by Dickens.
Oh, cute.
And so that became her name. That's how she's known. And when she was a teenager, her family moved to London. And this is in the 70s. They were only there for a few months, but she decided she was going to stay. So there she is, young Nell, trying to figure out what to do. So she starts selling vintage clothing at the Kensington Market, opposite a young guy named Freddie Mercury.
Huh.
His stall was right across from hers.
He sold
vintage
Clothing?
frocks. Yes, it
Interesting.
wasn't in the movie, but he did.
Okay.
And she said that he was very nice, but he wouldn't stop talking about his band, Queen. And she told him not to quit his day job.
Oh,
And she said that he wore his pants so tight that you could see absolutely everything that was happening. And she sort of would roll her eyes about him. But she stayed in England and she started taking acting lessons. And she wound up doing theater and was doing some singing and wound up getting tapped by the producer and writer. The writer was Richard O'Brien for this new musical, Rocky Horror Show. So she was the original cast. It was a hit. Then it was going to be made into a movie. The director and the writer insisted that all of the original cast remain. However, the studio said, no, you have to have two Americans. And that's how Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon wound up in the movie.
okay.
Meatloaf was in the movie because he was in the show
What?
in England.
How funny.
And
How
she
weird.
said that he showed up and everyone was like, who's this little chubber? And like, who cares? And he opened his mouth and he blew everyone against the back wall. And he would walk around. His big pickup line to get all of the girls on the cast was, I'm known as being the best kisser at my school in Texas. She said, well, in Texas. But they were lifelong friends. Nell was known from this, and that gets you a lot of cachet. So she was running around New York with a see and be seen. One of the people that she was seen with many times was her friend Keith McNally, who is a major restaurateur. His restaurants include Balthazar, Cafe Luxembourg, Lucky Strike, Minetta Tavern, the Odeon, Pastis, Schiller's.
Bunch of those are still around.
Yeah, and he was referred to by
I
the
love
New York
Lucky
Times
Strike.
as the restaurateur who invented downtown. Keep that in mind. Invented downtown. And he frequently worked with his wife. Anyway, so they hook up with Nell Campbell, who has a vision. She wants to start a club, but a club unlike anything that is in New York. Now, in 1986, when this club opened, I've talked on this podcast a lot about discos. Like I talked about the arrival of the French disco.
Yeah, that was a fun story.
In New York. So nightlife that was in New York was discos. It was, big clubs, Studio 54. Everyone, was there to see and be seen. You got in if you looked right, that was it. That's not what she wanted. She wanted to make something that was a club. A real club.
So not dancing.
No, dancing.
Okay.
But that felt like you belonged.
Okay.
So what she created, and I thought this was really fascinating. Think about the timing of this. She created a space. There was the ground floor and then a downstairs. But the ground floor, you walk in, it was couches, kind of English manner, shabby, red, chandeliers. Well, she was the first place, hers was the first place in New York City that was a shabby chic lounge.
Oh.
The very first. So all of the, coffee shops, everything that you see where there's a couch someplace.
Right.
Thank you, Nell Campbell.
Awesome.
She started it. So Keith McNally, his wife, and Nell start this club. And it's totally democratic. It costs $10 to get in. Anyone can get in.
What?
There's no door. I mean, there's a door, but it's not like, you're getting picked.
Right. No velvet rope.
Well, there is a velvet rope, but it's simply because the place is so small. You have to have other people leave before you can let other people in.
Okay.
But generally, it was extremely democratic. So I used to go to Nell's. And because my memory is not always the greatest, I had to call in a ringer to help me to remember.
I think I know who you called.
Yes.
Can we mention?
Yes.
Nick.
Yes. So I actually called Nick a couple of days ago. I was like, dude, I think I remember what we did. He was like, yes, you were on drugs. And I'm like, yes, I was. So are you. Okay, let's remember. And he absolutely brought it back to life. Going out at the time, and we've talked about this before, you dressed. No one was in jeans. So Nick would go out in a vintage navy blue waiter's jacket, wearing either a white collar shirt buttoned all the way up or a navy one, and these navy kind of pleated, roomy pants. So it was like a very 1920s silhouette.
Okay.
And I was in Betsy Johnson all the time, or a black cocktail dress. And that's what everybody was wearing.
Yeah.
That's what it looked like. We would go in, and Nell's didn't really get hopping until around midnight. It was open from, I think, 8 p.m. until 4 a.m. So we would go really early. We would start our nights by going to Nell's and then go off and have dinner someplace and then go to one of the other clubs. The other thing to keep in mind is the whole, you know how Keith McNally was the king of downtown? Well, Nell's was one of the jewels in the crown. And like Florent, which was an outpost for the meatpacking district, Nell's was the outpost for West 14th Street.
Okay. And what avenue are we on?
9th.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you a little description because Nick and I plotted it out. This is what it would be to go out clubbing when you started at Nell's. Nell's was at 224 West 14th Street. Then you take a cab, because God forbid you take the bus, and just go down 14th Street to the Palladium at 126 East 14th Street, which is just off Union Square. The tunnel opened, then Area, and then Sound Factory. That's 220 12th Avenue, 532 West 27th. They're both all the way on the water. And Area was at 157 Hudson, not quite on the water, same area. So Nell opened that up. Those were the places to be. The others were big dance clubs where there was house music, and,
Right.
and that was the scene. She had a jazz band.
Uh-huh.
It was pure
Did people dance to
London.
jazz?
Well, then you would go downstairs.
Okay.
And the thing I say that Nell's was very democratic, every kind of music, every kind of patron, people who had every kind of interest that you could imagine would congregate there. And they would go downstairs where there were 3 rooms, dance floor. Another room was where the DJ was. And then there was the ante room before the bathroom. We don't talk about that.
Okay. What? Was that drugs or sex?
That's drugs.
Okay.
That's drugs. That room, that dance floor was kept really dim. The idea was it didn't matter who you were standing next to. You were there to dance. So I think I've talked about that with Niagara, that it was one of the most fun places to go because if you were a great dancer, you just were there and someone would dance with you. Nell's had the same principle. It was get everybody in a room, lower the lights so no one's eyeballing each other and being a dick, and you just dance. And that was really what happened. And it was like check your ego at the door, which was sort of hilarious because it was filled with what we then called Euro trash. We would now call them Europeans. And it was gay and it was straight. It was black. It was white. It was Puerto Rican. It was everybody. We would go, and I remember always feeling kind of like, these people are so much more sophisticated than I am. How did I even get in here? And then Nick reminded me that we were definitely not the least sophisticated people. There was a night when a friend of ours from Kenyon, who is from Ohio, and she had the most beautiful boyfriend you'd ever seen in your life. Like Jake from 16 Candles was a dog next to this one. And she was cute, but this was her high school boyfriend. Like, so we go to Nell's, we meet them there on, what is ostensibly the line. And she's wearing a pink polka dotted prom dress. And
Oh.
it's not ironic yet.
Oh, no.
So we didn't get in.
Oh,
That was the
no.
only time.
Because of her dress?
They just wouldn't even make eye contact.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Oh,
so that was
honey.
the one time. But on the other side, they didn't let Cher in. Why?
Why?
Because Cher refused to pay the $10.
Oh, come on, Cher.
She said, I'm Cher. And they were like, go to studio. You got to pay the $10 if you want to be that
Right.
way. She refused to do it.
That's Cher.
I know. It
Come
doesn't sound
on.
very Cher-like, but there it is. And the music that they played, again, it was unlike any place else because they would play jazz, they would play Motown, they would play rap, they would play house, they would play new wave, and all of it had a melody. None of it was deep house. It wasn't all or It was fun. It was the Jackson 5. People would run downstairs. So they'd be up and you could hear what was going on. And people would go running downstairs like, oh my God, that's the song of my youth. And crowd this microscopic dance floor. So it was this little oasis of magic and beauty, which you didn't have at any of the other clubs. Now, Nell herself was a bit of a renegade and was known for having little moments in her earlier days of dancing on the bar naked and just spicing things up. And that's who she was.
The impression I get is that she was very happy, like good-spirited, not a diva.
Not at all.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She was there to have a good time and to create a good time.
And she's still with us.
Oh, very much so. Her ethos, even though her club was totally different, was similar to studio, which is I'm here to throw a party and come to my party every night. Also, ages were mixed there. It wasn't just gender, race, what have you. People, and we certainly would dance until we had sweated through our clothing. And Nick reminded me that this was so common. And we would do this also at a place called Crowbar, which I will describe some other time. And you would dance so much and I certainly wasn't the only person who did this. We would start taking our clothes off. And I remember, and Nick reminded me of this, that we would have to go out into the cold in the wintertime to cool off because it was so outrageous and the steam would come off our heads.
Oh my God.
It would just be like vapor coming off of us as we stood outside to cool down. And the music that was played I started to describe it, but here's a list that we remembered. Soul to Soul, Crystal Waters, all of the music that eventually found its way onto the soundtrack for Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, retro 70s, remixes of the Communards. Remember the Bronski beat? Cheerful dance music. So to your point, happy. Everything was happy. And you know that I love reading quotes from people who were there because, I was there, but I wasn't a habitué, right? There's this wonderful article in Medium that's an oral history of Nell's.
Fun.
And some of the people who were deeply involved had something to say about it. It's described in the article as being the de facto living room for Andy Warhol, Jean-Michel Basquiat, Keith Haring, Julian Schnabel, Jay McInerney, Mike Tyson, Debbie Harry, Prince, and Eddie Murphy. Everyone paid the entry fee. DJ Stretch Armstrong said, I remember vividly the first time I went to Nell's. I've probably been to Nell's hundreds of times, but the first time is indelibly etched upon my memory. We probably bought our clothes at Charivari on the Upper West Side. I think we drank 40s from a bodega to get a little bit of liquid courage because we knew that there was a good chance that we wouldn't get in. Wrong. I remember walking towards the door and you could see from about half a block away these people clamoring to get in and no one was moving. It was the craziest thing. I felt like once we got in, there was some divine force pulling my strings and I just walked in. From that day on, I was able to go to Nell's anytime I wanted. I don't know why. I wasn't cool. I didn't have money. I didn't even have facial hair. It's hard to express the sensation of being in Nell's the first time. It was magical. The music in that era was the best. New York City was the musical center of the world. Downtown was still a bit of a frontier, particularly to kids from uptown. If you went downtown, you knew you might not get back home.
This is true.
This is very, very true. DJ Clark Kent, who we've talked about on
We
this
have.
podcast, who is no longer with us, said, "The crazy shit was how many athletes and rappers and actors used to call me to help them get into Nell's. I used to bring Anthony Mason from the New York Knicks. I'd walk up, go into Nell's. He'd be standing outside of the door. And I was like, that's Anthony Mason. He plays for the Knicks. Let him in." And they let him in. It was just crazy. It was insane going to Nell's. That's also part of what I love about this. No one in that group would have known a sports game
Right.
if it hit them over the head.
So it was hard to get in just because it was crowded.
That is my memory.
Okay.
For sure. There was never a problem getting in. When I was reading this, I think that people were coming in with a preconception
That it
the
was
velvet rope thing. Exactly. But that wasn't my experience ever. It was just you had to wait your turn.
Right. And not wear
a pink
tacky
prom dress. Yes. That was a problem. DJ Clark Kent also said, you didn't go there going, we're just going to go hear hip hop, or we're going to go to the garage and just hear house music, or we're going to go to the loft and hear something weird. You went to Nell's and you actually felt like you were going to hear everything and see everybody. It was like the playing field was level for everybody to be cool. Just to get downstairs into that pitch black room, it felt like you were in a club, but everything else was a disco.
Okay.
From Jessica Rosenblum, who's one of the door people. Nell had a really strong personality, and she definitely could be a bit difficult, but she really wasn't with me. I had an important job as the door person, and I did it well. I also have a strong personality. So being slightly older than me, she was smart enough to know how to manage me well. I thought I was Madonna. Pretty much every night when I put my hair and makeup on, I would channel her and hold up her album cover next to me. So what album did you use to get psyched? I had the earring with the heart and the cross, and I had the stud bracelets up my wrist, combat boots, and a plaid mini skirt. I stood on a tiny platform outside so I could see everything because it was a sea of people. People lost their minds to get into that place. Now, what happened afterwards? Well, Keith McNally and his wife divorced. He left the ownership of the club, and it was just Nell and his wife. She started to get tired of it. She was over it. She sold it. She sold it to two men, one of whom was Chris Noth, Mr. Big of Sex and the City fame.
When did this happen?
2004.
Okay.
A little before 2004.
So Nell's was still around in 2004.
They ran it for a little while, and then it became a different club that he owned. So it's an example of...
Wait, he changed
the name. There were these clubs, these places, and these bars in New York, and it still exists. I'm just thinking about your buddy who owns Malt and Mold, that are entirely personality driven.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a club that was completely unique. It set the bar for everything that came after it. Once she wasn't there, the party was over.
It was just different.
Well,
yeah, Chris Noth and Nell Campbell, very different people.
Remarkable.
like actually, it's hard to imagine them in the same room.
And, when I was talking to Nick about it, we agreed that it really reminds us of our friend Katrine, who is no longer with us, who was one of the first people to have a bar with a dance floor and having bands play in Williamsburg.
Right.
She was on Metropolitan. And relatively recently, in fact, it was in, I guess, November, I saw TV on the radio at Webster Hall, and I saw them play their first gig ever at Katrine's, because that's how she threw a party.
So cool. What's our tie-in?
Magnetic personalities.
Ooh, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Without Sun Myung Moon, no Moonies.
No Moonies.
Without Nell, no Nells.
No Nell.
And it's not so, I mean, you could say that about almost anything, really, anything that someone starts, but it's the longevity and the rabid
enthusiasm.
yes. So
they both
magnetic.
really enjoyed.
Yeah, let's not make Nell into a cult.
Okay.
We're just not going to do that. I'm just going to say that it is amazing how a strong, magnetic, and exciting personality can capture people's imaginations.
Awesome. That is fantastic. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Glad that you returned from London. Wonderful to be back in your office.
Thanks,
recording
man.
the podcast.
It's so good to be back.
And next week we'll have some more information about our new YouTube channel, which is
so exciting.
We're going to do it.
I just love that you like casually slipped in that we're doing this today instead of a big announcement. Like, by the way, we're going to like grow. Keep an eye out.